In his last book, The Windows of Brimness, Minnesota-born author Bill Holm asked, "Where does poetry live?" For Bill, iconoclast, poet, curmudgeon, author, musician, teacher, traveler, friend, poetry lived in the spare and open spaces we both loved, where big ideas had room to grow.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, the North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.
I'm Wayne Goodwinson, a photographer, a North Dakota native, and someone who traveled many miles across North Dakota, Minnesota, and Manitoba with my friend Bill Holm. Bill was many things, but at the core, I think he was the conscience of every man and the spokesman for civility and decency.
I am Bill Holm. I am in my little sitting room at Brimness, my house in Hafsås, Iceland. This is such a heavenly fjord. It opens to the north. The ones that open to the east or to the west or to the south are frequently deprived of light. The mountains stay back a mile or two from the sea, so they're quite grand and quite impressive and quite beautiful, but they're not right on your ass.
Most of the year, Bill lived and taught in the same small town in southwestern Minnesota where he grew up. But every year as summer rolled around, he packed his many notebooks and his pens and winged his way to his adopted home in the country his immigrant grandparents left behind.
I had come years ago as a Fulbright to teach at the university, and I gotten to know lots of people when I was here for damn near 2 years, at the end of the 70s until the middle of 1980. And then I was here long enough so that I had to make a sort of existential choice. You know, I thought even then very much of not going back to the United States. Most of my colleagues at the university were young Englishmen who had come to Iceland, learned Icelandic, you know, were busy fathering children and having a good time and translating, and they were clever fellows. None of them would ever go back to England. They loved it here. Well, I was here a year and a half, and I loved it. And I'd begun to make friends and settled in, and I spoke better Icelandic than I now do, but still terrible. And I thought, maybe I should just not go home. But I am, after all, a writer. I knew that. And I hadn't really written any of my books yet. And I thought, if I stay in Iceland, I'll never really be an Icelander. I can never really say anything directly to this culture. I will always be a tourist, and I still am. You know, somebody who just happens to live here and likes it. But the people that I can talk to, that I can crab at, as it were, and make, you know, some proposals, or just, you know, deal with the experience that we share, is in the United States, in America, in Minnesota, in the Midwest. So I had to go home to get my books written. I had some unconscious sense of that. So I went back and I took a job in Marshall, even, you know, 15 miles from Minneota. And before that, I had taught on the East Coast, and I had dreams of going to Boston or somewhere and or going abroad. But I go back and I take a job in the most boring branch of the University of Minnesota in the most boring town, 12 boring miles away from my boring hometown where I'm related to everybody. And that was, oddly enough, exactly the right thing to do. Sometimes just by being idiots, we stumble into some wisdom. I suppose that would be the right word for it. So there I was in Marshall. So I know where all the bodies are buried in American life in the Midwest. And I have credentials. I've lived there for a long time. I am now old. And when I make some complaints and proposals about what I see that's gone haywire in American life, I expect my fellow citizens to buck up, pay attention, and improve. Because that's also my function as a writer. I'm not somebody who intends simply to amuse people. I mean, it's fine to be funny, and I like humor. But I mean to improve them, by God. I mean to make them saner and kinder and more decent and more intelligent. I mean to make them think hard and not always comfortable thoughts.
Paranoia. After 20 years of this, the hell with you all. I'm the American, not you. Maybe I only seem to lose all the elections myself. I walk into a church, membership declines. I apply for a job, computer learned it yesterday. I state a firm belief, they think it's irony. Overhead, geese still migrate on time. Don't bother with passports. Honking for anybody to listen, singing, I'm the American, not you. Oh, sing it again, goose. You're the American, not them, not them, not them.
I mean, my simple grief at the state of the United States. It's a little like Walt Whitman's grief in Democratic Vistas at what he saw around him. I mean, he had such enormous idealism that Americans really could be a decent place, a civilized place, that they could be some kind of a model for humanity at kindness, civility, decency, intelligence, love of beauty, love of each other. Well, we haven't done very well. And we do worse every year. So I suppose I'm a little protective about that. You know, the Bush administration would have said that I was, unpatriotic. I love those little stupid arguments in America. You're not wearing your flag lapel pin. God, what morons we are. We don't deserve a decent country. We don't. We must think harder and work harder. We shouldn't waste it.
Despite our shared Icelandic heritage, I didn't meet Bill and his wife Marcy Brecken until later in life when both he and I were at a stage in our careers to take on a joint project.
I stayed out of Iceland for a long time after I went back to the States. I went other places. I spent a year in China, then I spent another half a year in China, and another quarter of a year in China, and that was occupied my consciousness for a while. I spent some time in Madagascar. I went to England a couple of times and sat for long periods of time. I wandered around on a couple of grants in the United States, getting my first couple of books done. And finally, of course, I'd made so many friends, and they would stop and see me in America now and again. And I realized they were all getting to be middle-aged. They were no longer, these young, gossamer blondes and these fleet-of-foot young fellows. They had pot guts and receding hairlines and fallen breasts and sometimes even, teenage children. God forbid what life will do to you. So I thought, I remember Iceland so fondly, and I'm so fond of all these people, I should go back and see them. So an opportunity presented itself to do that. And Marcy had never been here. So she came along and we sort of toured the country.
As a 6-year-old, I loved family gatherings in mountain North Dakota with my Icelandic grandparents. The grown-ups would stand, men on one side, women on the other. Kids like me would find a welcome place in either camp, but I was drawn to the men who, after dealing with the required weather and car issues, would begin a regular ritual, taking turns reciting poems in Icelandic. I remember thinking then that it'd be okay to be a man, laughing with friends, speaking a mysterious language, reciting and enjoying poetry together. Years later, I was telling a friend about this, and he said I should contact Bill Holm from Minnesota. So I called Bill out of the blue and said, "My name is Wayne Goodmanson." "Another goddamn Icelander," he said. I continued backing into why I had called, telling him about family trips to mountain. Then I mentioned Cowan. Bill interrupted again, this time with a poem about the time Cowan visited Minnesota.
Bammenhota bakkesbota, banneskjóten þar, frá Minnesota, Minnesota, margur ljótur var. From Minnesota, Minnesota, many were ugly. They still are, of course.
I immediately knew we were off on a new adventure together.
We were investigating the Icelandic immigrant poet Cowan, who lived in North Dakota, among other places. That's where he died. And he was the first light verse poet in Icelandic. The old Icelanders, when I first came to Iceland, loved him. Every house had a copy of Cowan, and old people knew reams of his poetry by heart. Much of it was satire on the very bad Icelandic spoken by immigrants, and it would be sort of mixed in with English and with language from their neighbors. He had great fun with that. The problem was your audience is a little small, in that to really get the jokes in the thing, you have to be equally fluent in Icelandic and English. And that sort of cuts your audience down just slightly. But that's all right, you know, poetry is where the money is, so that you can always count on 5 or 6 million people who can want to read that stuff. But we went to Mountain and various little towns around there and interviewed, at that time, people who had known Cowan. Arnie and Rosa Johnson, I remember, both over 90. Fascinating people. Rosa just wanted to feed you continually. And Arnie knew Cowan, and he recited for us some of Cowan's secret poems, the ones that were a little spicy. And, you know, that you didn't say those in front of ladies. So we collected material, and we got to stay in Mountain, North Dakota, and go to Byron's Bar in the evening to have a few bumps. And of course, Byron was full of old Icelanders who also knew Cowan and had things to say. Wonderful kind of stories. So we have wonderful tapes with a kind of portrait frozen in time. I later had them transcribed by somebody in Canada. So they're waiting for a book. And Wayne, of course, took his pictures like a good boy. And I had the tapes transcribed like a good boy. But one thing I couldn't do, and I wanted to include 30 maybe of Cowan's poems, and to find some brilliant translator who could bring those poems into English so that some ordinary American or Canadian reader would have some sense of what it was he did as a poet, and of his skill and of his talent and of his wit. But to find somebody who's that good and also has a sense of humor is difficult. So you know any good translators who are, you know, have a sense of humor and equal doses of Icelandic and English?
Sadly, Bill himself passed away soon after this interview, and the project must, for now, remain unfinished.
The sea eats what it pleases. If you turn your back to the ocean, do you think the tide will not find you if it decides to rise a little higher than usual, to swallow an extra helping of gravel, to suck on your bones to clean its palate? The sea eats what it pleases, whether you face it or give it your back. No use having opinions about this. But the sea does not hate you, or imagine that you have wounded it with your avarice. You cannot blaspheme the honor of water, or insult the tide for tasting of salt. Only humans, so newly risen from fish, imagine drowning each other for reasons.
Bill's love affair with Iceland continued throughout his life. Bill established a respected series of writers' workshops, introducing a new generation of American writers to the lovely windswept lands of Iceland and the people he had come to love.
My oldest friend from my time here is a woman named Wincy Johansdottir. Wincy said, "Well, you've never been to Hafsós." I said, "No, I haven't." And she said, "Well, my choir mate Disa is working there, and they've just started an immigrant museum." So we took a trip north, and we had, you know, wonderful adventures on the way, and finally got here, met Valgeir, who invented this town, marvelous man. So we, of course, you know, stayed here, and Valgeir put us up in one of his guest houses. Well, the night we rented it, I think Marcy and I were the only people here. So we opened the window, And we crawled into bed, and I think we've never had such a wonderful and romantic night. It was one of the pink nights. I mean, when it was glowing, the sky was glowing all night long. And the river burbled and the sea sloshed in, and the birds were crying. I mean, for a Minnesota guy, we both fell madly in love with this little house. So we stayed here the next year, and Valget and I had by this point become pretty good friends. And so we're sitting here and having a drink late at night, and I complained that because I had gone into the very lucrative profession of poetry, I probably couldn't afford a house in Hassos, but some idiot son of a bitch who had done a film with an Icelandic film director had made enough money on his film to buy a house up on top of the hill. And I thought, if that jackass, but I mean, he's in the film business, I'm in poetry, I'll never... And Valget, listens to my whining for a while, and he says, well, maybe there is something you can afford. I said, what's for sale? And he mentioned a couple of things. And I said, no. He said, I think I should sell you Brimnes. And I knew this was close to his heart because this is the first place he did. He loved this place too. And I said, you wouldn't, Valget. I said, I think so. I think you are the right person to have Brimnes. And I said, well, I couldn't afford it anyway. And then I would charge you 3.5 million. And I said, I rest my case. And so, for millionaires, he said, nej, ekki dollari, bara kronor. And at that time, the dollar was strong and the kroner was weak. It was about 85 or 90 to the dollar. So I went click, 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 click. And it was about $37,000 or $38,000. Thought I could manage that. So I said, let's pour another Brennivin, Valget. I think you have sold a house.
Bread soup, an old Icelandic recipe. Start with the square, heavy loaf, steamed a whole day in a hot spring, until the coarse rye, sugar, yeast grow dense as a black hole of bread. Let it age and dry a little. Then soak the old loaf for a day in warm water flavored with raisins and lemon slices. Boil till it is thick as molasses. Pour into a flat white bowl. Ladle a dollop of whipped cream to melt into its brown belly. This soup is alive as any animal, and the yeast and cream and rye will sing inside you after eating for a long time.
Well, I've got a whole book about Iceland at the moment. That's what I'm working on. I must have 200 poems. I don't know, what the keepers are. Poems that would be of interest to other people and are worth reading more than once. But you never know. When you do this, you work on them for a while, and then you leave them sit, and you sort of like fermenting corn mash, and you wait and see what happens. I'm always amazed at looking at something a year later. Sometimes they're much better than you remembered them. You think it was complete idiocy, and you've actually been smarter than you thought. And sometimes you are a hopeless idiot. Is it easy to write? There's two answers to that question. There's nothing I would rather do in the world. It's the only thing I know how to do, and I probably don't work hard enough. I could write better. But it's a great joy to be here in privacy and silence, to think and to listen to the tunes in your head and to try to write them down, yes. The house is very modest. A good windstorm could knock it right down. It's frail, it's old, it's kind of a little shack. But it's got windows that you would pay millions for. So my theory is that the house is just a few simple boards to hold up a roof to keep you dry while you're staring out the windows. My joke was, I come in with the terns and I leave with the terns. Icelanders measure the seasons by their birds, and among their favorites are the Arctic terns, which they call kría, because of the noise that they make. And the terns come back first to the lake in Reykjavik and then all over the country about the middle of May. You surely have been attacked by a tern at some point. Oh God, they go right for your eyeballs and your head. They're fierce little devils. So they're quite a beautiful bird, and they're aerodynamically designed, but they're also very aggressive. So people walk through, they're called kríavarp, waving an umbrella to keep the kría off. And children who are raised next to kríavarps, when they go out to play in the summer, they have to wear helmets. But the Icelanders adore these birds. Why? Well, it's the most amazing story in the animal kingdom. This bird, which is about this big, comes to Iceland, North Greenland, Spitsbergen, North Norway, in other words, the high Arctic, clear up to the polar ice, and to lay their eggs and to fish. And they're here always for the season of light. They come to places when it's 24 hours of light. And the moment the dark starts, they pack up their bags. And they go to the Antarctic Peninsula and Tierra del Fuego from here. They've marked them. 12,000 miles. That means that this little bird every year goes 24 or 5,000 miles to lay its eggs, to stay alive. So they're amazing. And when they get here, they're the true bringers of spring, and they brought it from Antarctica. They're also a bird that spends almost its entire life in the light. So insofar, I'm not a Christian, or much of a Christian, if at all, but the old thing that you heard in Lutheran Sunday school is God is light. Well, then the kría is God. Well, I'll read something about why I come here. I recommend this book to everyone. I'd like about 200,000 of you to buy copies of it, so I get some royalties, so I'm not entirely broke. Taxes went up in Iceland. We've got to do something. I either have to hold up a bank or write more exciting poetry. So I come here to this spare place in the summer, and sometimes in the winter, when its spareness is magnified by snow and darkness. After a while, the United States is simply too much. Too much religion and not enough gods. Too much news and not enough wisdom. Too many weapons of mass destruction, or for that matter, of private destruction. Why search so far away when they live right under our noses? Too much entertainment and not enough beauty. Too much electricity and not enough light. Too much lumber and not enough forests. Too much real estate and not enough earth. Too many books and not enough readers. Too many runners and not enough strollers. Too many freeways, too many cars, too many malls, too many prisons. Too much security, but not enough civility. Too many humans, but not enough eagles. And the worst excess of all, too many wars. Too much misery and brutality, reflected as much in our own eyes as in those of our enemies. So I come here, to this spare place. A little thinning and pruning is a good anodyne for the soul. We see more clearly when the noise is less, the objects fewer. When Americans ask me to describe my little house in Iceland, I tell them, not entirely disingenuously, that it is a series of magical windows with a few simple boards to hold them up, to protect your head from rain while you stare out to sea.
In many ways, my friend Bill Holm was a contradiction. A self-described curmudgeon who loved life, a big bear of a man with the delicate touch of a musician, a footloose traveler who was rooted deep in the prairie on which he was born. In the course of his career, Bill gave readings at scores of college campuses, retreats, and bookstores where his poems and essays came to life. I'm reminded that he was always full of advice for others and ended his readings with this poem that said so much about the way he lived his life.
Advice. Someone dancing inside us knows only a few steps. The do your work in 4/4 time and the what do you expect waltz. He hasn't noticed yet the woman standing behind the lamp, the one with black eyes, who knows the rumba and strange steps in jumpy rhythms from the mountains of Bulgaria. If they dance together, something unexpected will happen. If they don't, the next world will be a lot like this one.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, the North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.